Everyone, we've reached the 10 o'clock hour. It is Tuesday, March 14th, 2023. The Board of Supervisors of the County of Del Norte and the governing body of all other special assessment and taxing districts for which said board so acts is now meeting in regular session. Only those items that indicate a specific time will be heard at the assigned time. All other items may be taken out of sequence to accommodate the public and staff availability. Kylie, would you take roll?
Supervisor Howard?
Present.
Supervisor Starkey?
Here.
Supervisor Wilson?
Here.
Supervisor Borges?
Here.
Chair Short?
I am here. If you would all join me in a moment of reflection. Thank you. And now, if you would, join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Supervisor Wilson.
Ready to begin. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Do we have any new employees this morning?
None this morning.
Thank you very much. Do we have any actions to report out of closed session?
Yes, we have two. The board voted unanimously to engage the firm of Shook, Hardy and Bacon in the case of John Doe v. Humboldt County, and voted unanimously to join the settlement with the retailers in the national opioid litigation.
Thank you, sir. The chair requests any deletions, corrections, or additions from the board members to the agenda. Is there any such items? Seeing none. At this time, I'll receive any brief reports from board members. Is there any such reports?
I'd make two. Go ahead, Supervisor Wilson.
Supervisor Wilson.
Just over this last 2 weeks, did, at the request of the planning department, attend and get any appointment with Yurok Tribe to attend their planning committee meeting. At that committee meeting, we presented a project that has been ongoing to replace culverts along the Klamath River, and it was beneficial. I thought the exchange was helpful in facilitating the movement forward on that project that's been in the works since 2018, when the funding was awarded to the county for moving forward on this project with us as lead on it. So with that, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Wilson. Supervisor Howard.
Two things. One, if you happen to read any of the posts on the Lost Coast Outpost and Wild Rivers Outpost, the move by the judge after almost 10 years of litigation by Friends of Del Norte, EPIC, and Center for Biological Diversity to basically rule in the favor of the defendants, which is us and Caltrans, to move forward with Highway 199 was a great decision, and I want to thank the plaintiffs for considering the new information gathered by Caltrans, more specifically the death toll at two of those locations that were programmed to be fixed when we awarded the contract to Flatiron back in 2012. Really appreciate them taking a second look at that and making the decision not to move forward. And then we had a recent CSAC meeting, and this is really directed toward Mr. Hooper, who's been really at point on our issues at a state and federal level. But with 275 bills on the state's legislative platform this year, we've got a lot to pay attention to. I know CSAC's covering about 1,780 of those in depth, but there's a lot of spot bills in place that don't have language right now. So good luck, Mr. Hooper. We got a lot to consider. Do we really need that much legislation coming through the state this year? That's all I have to report.
Thank you, Supervisor Howard. Supervisor Wilson, go ahead.
Sorry. I just wanted to mention and hopefully put the word out that we have unprecedented snowpack way above normal, that it's gone up into our mountains. The high amount of rains that we are now encountering, I should say, are filling up our basins as well as our dams, reservoirs, and our other water sources. As we travel along Smith River and Klamath River, we can see the unprecedented high waters at this point in time. So I would encourage, because we are set up for real potential for flooding in the future, especially with the high snowpack and once the new rains come from the spring, that hopefully those in our community, especially in the 5th District, Klamath, and all along that river, just be aware, be attentive, prepare yourselves for having those same flood conditions like we had in 2004, because you end up being isolated for over extended period of times, potential loss of power as well as so make sure your alternative heat sources, make sure that you're prepared if you do have to-go bags, getting ready to evacuate on short notice. Make sure your medications are up and make sure your supplies are in place to, if you are going to stay in those areas, especially the Klamath Glen, Hunter Creek, those areas, Requa that get isolated, that you're prepared because as we've found in floods in the past, it can last multiple days and rescue resources are limited. So please be attentive, be prepared, and take all precautions in those areas that are affected by our rivers. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Wilson. This time we'll take up our consent agenda. Is there any public comment on the consent agenda?
Hello.
Morning.
Good morning. Let me see here. Well, I wanted to see if you'd pull the item where you're appointing previous Community Development Director Eric Taylor to the Planning Commission. I go through the Planning Commission. He was my first competitor in the city there, and he's got a I've actually come to believe that the Board of Supervisors leverages violations of the antitrust laws federally and state against me when you set my tax rate against my competitor. I know I have years of history of criticizing you guys at public comment, Facebook, city council, emails, back and forth. I told Chris Howard after he changed the cannabis ordinance for somebody up there near Smith River, I said, man, it took years. I said, what do I have to do, send you a couple jars of jam or something? You know, and you guys still go ahead and set my tax rate 6%. I pay excise tax on your 6%, so it's a 7% disadvantage for me. I barely get 3 votes out of that planning commission every year. I feel like I would get a 4th if I told a racist joke. I call them the Boss Hog 5, but really you guys are the original. I'm trying to pull up my little public comment, but honestly, I've been doing this for years. It's wrecked my nerves. I've started smoking cigarettes because it is impossible to compete against people who don't like you. And when a government can set a tax rate against you, I can't find a lawyer because you guys are being sued by everybody in the county, and every lawyer in this town is occupied and has a conflict of interest because they're defending against your mismanagement of the Del Norte County Sheriffs, your mismanagement of, you know, where we spend 70% of our dollars. I know that we have a different narrative in these buildings where we kind of pat each other on the back and whatnot. You know, Eric Taylor was the city community. I can't bring up my paper, but Eric Taylor was the city community development director, and so we all went to him thinking you guys were going to lag to try and find locations. Anybody who wanted to do business, you know, you guys all did lag. They took several years, and he retired right after the ordinance was made. The ordinance he helped craft, he spoke against. He spoke against my planning hearing in the county. He's a prohibitionist. He's the reason we didn't have pot stores in the city, because he advised the city council that they needed prohibition. They could go to Brookings, look at what they'd done up there. Within months of his operation, being a city employee, he had bought the land behind Safeway, advised that they only allow it behind Safeway, which is probably the reason he complained about the ordinance they adopted. Probably the reason they have a really loose ordinance is because it would have been a huge conflict of interest to only allow it behind Safeway, you know. And he'd retired and got the first license. And I mean, go ahead and do it because it's authentic to your style. But thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment?
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, Board of Supervisors.
Good morning.
Again, we see the consent agenda being used to expand government influence in policy that negatively affects the standard of living in Del Norte County. We see it in line item number 3 in open-ended contracts that don't have a scope of work. How are you going to manage, what are there, like 9 different firms, engineering firms? How do you decide who gets which project? Mr. Hooper does an amazing job, but he's being overtaxed, and maybe he should just do more what he wants to do. I agree, but you should have some supervision. We need a plan. Number 4, an amendment to a contract. The contract isn't mentioned. A pension benefit plan. Number 6, the Legacy Homeless Hotel, $2.5 million. Estimates way expired. A lot more costs involved. It's funny, most of these consent agenda items have no financing needed, no cost. Really? Must be good, must be nice. Not being accountable for spending everyone's money. Lots of things wrong with number 6. I could take 3 minutes just on that one. Not that you'd allow me. Number 7. Is giving the Department of Health and Human Services executive authority for future homeless housing assistance and prevention without having any approval. We're just going to say she can decide what we change and what we do. It's not good. Number 12 is bad. Don't send that opposition letter. Health of our community's probably never been worse as a result of those funds. Number 13, could use a history lesson for that one. Government takes Reservation Ranch. It's very bad. Using it as a disaster plan. I'm kind of embarrassed, actually, growing up here and not understanding the travesties that happened. Now we're just like, oh yeah, it's the history, but it's consensual. Let's not talk about it. There's a lot that you guys can do. I just encourage you to enable your authority for the best interest of our community.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on the consent agenda? Bringing it back to the board. Motion would be appropriate at this time.
Well, I do have a question about number 8.
Okay, would you like to pull that for a separate
Yeah,
discussion
let's
and
pull it
vote?
for separate
Okay.
discussion.
So we'll pull number 8.
And then I'll make a motion for the remaining.
We have a motion to pass the consent agenda minus item number 8. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Kylie, would you pull the vote?
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Supervisor Wilson?
Yes.
Supervisor Borges?
Yes.
Supervisor Starkey?
Yes.
Chair Short?
Yes. Number 8.
So I just want, is there a conflict? Is the fact that he owns, a city dispensary, several, I think, does that cause a conflict with regard to determining planning, especially when it comes to cannabis in the county region?
Yeah, probably. I mean, maybe an FPPC letter would be a good idea for him, but definitely, approving or not approving the permit of a direct competitor would definitely be a problem. But you can recuse yourself from one issue at a time, and it's not the end of the world.
So Supervisor Wilson, would Mr. Taylor be willing to get a letter before we make this approval? Do you think we can table this for further discussion after he contacts the FPPC to see if there is a conflict?
Would-
The FPPC won't give a letter until there's a decision pending.
Okay.
The abstract idea of it, they'll give you informal advice, but it's not, you want the formal thing that says,
Okay.
I'm legally protected if I do it.
Sir, your comments are not being recognized. If you would please.
Okay, well, I would just say that we tabled the matter. We could proceed with a vote today, but I've got some concerns.
Wouldn't it be, I'm not sure I understand how it would be different than any other business owner sitting on a board that would potentially have some effect on some area near their business. Why would it be something that would just be the routine?
Yeah, legally, I don't
Recusal
think
of
it
yourself.
would. I think to Mr. Dorigo's comment, it's more about the current constitution and the views on the board, but those are political things. That's not a legal conflict of interest issue. So it might affect his permit, but it's not because of a legal issue. It's because of how many other people are on the board and what they happen to think.
But if that did in fact happen and there was some sort of denial, that applicant would have the ability to come to the Board of Supervisors on an appeal.
Yes.
Okay.
And plus, the scenarios you're describing, he would have to recuse himself on the planning commission from those decisions. He's got a
And-
direct conflict of interest.
Okay.
Yeah,
No,
and
thank you.
that's just like our board here. I own businesses, I own, residences and other properties in the community, and should there be a conflict, you recuse yourself.
Okay.
His experience, his knowledge, his background, not only as a business developer, but also as a property owner, and his knowledge with having been on the city, brings all that to bear and helps us in a community, and especially in a planning department that currently is vacant one seat. Ralph Dickey, unfortunately, left the community, but did a good job while he was here. And so that knowledge is going to be helpful, I think, currently on the Planning Commission. That's why I recommend it. Thank you.
All right, so with that, I will motion to approve number 8.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, all right, we have a motion. We have a motion and a second. Is there any public comment on item number 8 from the consent agenda?
I heard a rumor a couple of weeks back that former city community development director, one of the architects of the first city cannabis ordinance and first city dispensary licensee, was being appointed to the county board I have barely squeezed 3 votes out of since I started. You all know the history in that and our relationship as constituent and elected. Through many communications over the years via Facebook, email, and public comment, I've been highly critical of the way both the city and county governments operate in a burn the docks, beer, and no law north of the Klamath mentality, and its leaky bathtub beg for more fiscal models set by certain departments. I'm certain the county supervisors have used their position to set my tax rate to disadvantage me against the former city community development director, turn landlord to my competition. Takes me all weekend to negotiate pricing to allow me to compete against what has become a 7% disadvantage. Eric Taylor was the city community development director and one of the highest paid city employees at the time. He guided the making of the city cannabis ordinance, kept the city prohibiting pot until he retired, even banning medical users from growing a plant. He spoke against my first planning hearing, saying, "Look what it's done to Brookings. They can go there." Within months, he had bought land behind Safeway, advised only allowing certain cannabis uses there as planning advisor to the city, retired, and got the first city license. Then another. My competition goes through no annual hearing, nor pays municipal tax due to the ordinance Eric Taylor advised. I go through the Boss Hog 5 each year, and I get 3 votes. I might get a 4th if I tell a racist joke. The city locations pay no tax to the municipality. The supervisors set mine the highest allowed by the voter each year in retaliation for my criticism of your management of the county, and that is a federal crime. The city and county do 2x2s. The county pot group had city employee Eric Taylor on it, so he helped advise the county ordinance as well as a city employee. because we're all so united. The chief of police was a sheriff's deputy. Our current sheriff was a city officer. Some are related. And today the county will appoint one of the first city licensees to the commission I have struggled to get 3 votes from. I have no doubt that you set my tax rate to disadvantage me because of my criticism. And you know what? It's turned me. I'm an anarchist. I'm done with it. I'm going to quit smoking. I'm going to have some fun. I'm going to start selling some clothing. I'm going to put "we sell LSD" on the highway because that's what you guys were afraid of, you know, because you ended up making an ordinance for somebody you knew to allow them. You just didn't want to see a hippie. I can be a hippie. I can name my store "We Sell Acid" and I'll sell tie-dye. I'll probably get a lot of customers because people are interested in that kind of thing. But like, you know, the no law north of the Klamath thing, it's upsetting. And I know that we see in public, you know, that we praise each other. We give lots of awards to people that are later suing us. Freaking, you know, and so it's hard to fire those people once you've given them 10 plaques. It's mismanagement, you know. In the private sector, we actually make documents so that we can have the ability to justify canning someone when we need to. But thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on item number 8? Seeing no public comment, Kylie, would you pull the vote?
Supervisor Howard,
Yes.
Supervisor Wilson,
Yes.
Supervisor Borges,
Yes.
Supervisor Starkey,
Yes.
Chair Short.
Yes. We'll move down the agenda to general government items. And let's see. You know what? I'm going to do budget transfers. We're just shy of our regularly timed items. So let's do budget transfers. We have 2 of them. One is approve and adopt the budget transfer 0208 in the amount of $25,000 within the Sheriff's Department budget for additional vehicle maintenance costs as requested by the Sheriff. And item number 21, approve and adopt budget transfers 03-02 in the amount of $75,000 to disperse state aid into accounts for the new WIC BFPC program budget unit state aid disbursement requested by the Director of Health and Human Services.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve
Second.
both budget items and a second. Is there any public comment on these budget items?
Good morning again, and thank you for allowing me to comment. I'm disappointed. Can't hardly believe I'm compelled to talk about having to give our mothers proper nutritional needs, providing for our kids to have proper nutritional needs, and just wondering why the budget difference. And, you know, we're signing this budget transfer for $75,000 and $34,000 for office supplies. You know, it's payroll, retirement. Do you have your budget today, Mr. Howard? Maybe you could help me. I've seen you flaunt that, like it's on the computer now, but you know, I going through the budget. A lot of payroll, a lot of overtime, a lot of maintenance. Where does, like, the food show up on here? Where does that come from? Is the director here? Can she maybe provide? I mean, if the program is to give better nutrition to our mothers, infants, and children, you would think we would be buying some supplies for that, other than office furniture. I'm not sure, you know, the county provided these WIC documents. One has 1 million for a caseload. I found that's for the state, but thank you for providing that too. And Del Norte has a varying caseload between 800 and 900 people. And I'm not sure, the board report said families, and just a small distinction between families and individuals. You know, if it's a family, probably doubles the number of people. So just, if we could be accurate, and if you have $600,000 for the budget, you know, you've already added another $400,000, and the contract's only 4 months old, 5 months old. So, I don't know, that contract's gonna be way over budget too. And the Department of Health, their funding's going away. State funding, we missed that opportunity. Decided to tax the poor locally. That was really good. Another 1%. Thank you, Mr. Howard. So yeah, just some answers would be good, and hopefully that you know, all that money is going to the people in need. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on these budget transfer items? Seeing no further public comment, Kylie, would you pull the vote, please?
Supervisor Borges,
Yes.
Supervisor Starkey,
Yes.
Supervisor Howard,
Yes.
Supervisor Wilson,
Yes.
Chair Short.
Yes. Thank you. Now we'll move to our 10:25 timed item. That is our general public comment period. Members of the public may address the board on matters which are within the jurisdiction of the board. If you are addressing the board regarding a matter listed on the agenda, you may be asked to hold your comments until the board takes up that matter. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. Is there any general public comment?
Hi, this is Robert Rigo again. I don't know if I'm going to stick around for the whole meeting, so I wanted to maybe get to you guys are going to review the budget later. After years of reading the very brief closed session reports, you know, where we see who's suing us, I've come to wonder what the county's per capita share of lawsuits from within our law enforcement departments is costing residents and how that compares with other communities. And also liability and insurance, how that has grown as certain events have happened. I remember looking into it after the Hiuchi Bridge shooting, and it doubled, you know, the next year, the liability coverage for that department. But I was kind of curious, you know, how this all fares as a cost for us, all of our lawsuits. I've come to understand that 70 cents on the dollar goes to Del Norte law enforcement departments of the money we raise locally. That only leaves 30 cents on the dollar for roads and planning that's not gotten by grants and whatnot, and leaves the residents paying for the water. One would think 70% might be a figure incurred in a foreign nation by colonized corporate oil interests to secure the resources from terrorists and rebels. Meanwhile, turnover within the department has been excused, perhaps dishonestly, by the claim the profession is in demand and competition between organizations is the reason we cannot keep officers. Yet documents have come to light that indicate more, that a toxic work environment may be the real culprit. Can staff give me a figure on the cost of defending the county and paying claims to previous employees within law enforcement departments? I also would like to know the revenue generated by the county community golf simulator produced in the first 24 months since the purchase during the pandemic. And also what portion of time booked on the community golf simulator was used by county staff and elected officials. If you stay tuned, I'm going to tell you something that Big Pharma does not want you to know about cleaning your colon. You know, I meant to do this with artificial intelligence readers in a British accent online, so I'll end it there because it doesn't make sense unless it's in an artificial voice. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other general public comment? Okay.
Good morning, Board. Dave Powell, thanks for the opportunity. I just wanted to let you know, this is kind of a personal thing, but on my vacation rental yesterday, I put in the noise monitoring device, and so it seems to be working well. Nothing's going on right now except for the river rushing by, but if any of you want to gain access to that or see snap screenshots of it, let me know. I'd be happy to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other public comment, we will take a moment to,
This was public comment, right?
this is general public comment, yes.
All right, thank you for confirming. Thank you again for allowing me to talk. One thing that all bonds us here is we all have a invested interest in having a better community. That's what we all want. You know, I'm concerned it is hard to get up here and talk to you guys, and you guys just ignore me all the time, and it's like, ah. But, you know, I encourage you to act, and let's start providing some beneficial improvements for our community. One action that would be appropriate would be to file charges against Friends of Del Norte for wrongful filing their lawsuit against Caltrans and impeding development on 199. The court lifted the injunction because the merits of the lawsuit were determined to be wrong. Who is Friends of Del Norte? Anybody here? Where do they meet? I don't know. Are they really friends, or do they live here? I don't know. Epic? Who's Epic? The Center for Biological Diversity. What group is that? Do they really have our best interest at heart? You know, they should pay for the increased costs of the project. They should be liable for the loss of life. You know, those road improvements, they were going to be safety improvements. False accusations, for sure. But, so, yeah, I think they shouldn't be allowed to participate in further litigation, for sure. Almost public discourse. That road is very vital, just like Last Chance. We need to see some improvements, and hopefully that project goes forward and rather quickly. You know, we'll continue to see more crashes and environmental damage, property loss of life. So hopefully we can improve our infrastructure and get some of these projects done. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll close the public comment period at this time and move to our 10:30 timed item. Receive an update as directed on Del Norte County's Indigent Defense Services relating to the findings of the Office of the State Public Defender, and give possible direction in the event the board chooses an alternative structure from what is currently in place, as requested by the county administrative officer.
All right, thank you, Chair. As stated in the board report that was given to the board and on the agenda today, there was a assessment done by the Office of the State Public Defender, and a presentation was given to the board in October of 2022 based on that assessment. The presentation given included some gaps and challenges to the county's current system, and included a recommendation from Ms. Arroyo that the county examine their current delivery of indigent defense services, as well as recommending that the county establish a fully staffed public defender's office. Following the presentation, the board directed staff to look into the county's indigent defense system and bring back a report, which is before you today. In response to this direction, county administration and county council have reviewed the findings in the report, and over the past several months developed the report and the projected budgets that are on today's agenda. And in addition, through this process, administration and council have also met with the current contracted public defenders and discussed the county's assessment of this indigent defense system, the report from the OSPD, and the alternative structures that were brought forward by that report, and that are included in today's agenda item as well. I think it is important to note that through those conversations and the staff's assessment, that although recommended by the Office of the State Public Defender that a fully staffed office be developed, staff and the current PDs do not endorse that option. Staff and the current PDs, we do recognize there are some gaps and challenges that need to be addressed in the current system, and should the board wish to make a change in the current system, an alternative is endorsed by both county staff and the PDs, and I can touch on that a little bit later. The structures that are brought forward in this report include a fully staffed public defender's office, which as I stated, was endorsed by the Office of the State Public Defender's Office. The estimated cost for that structure is $1,316,338, and is by far the most significant cost increase to the current structure. The other alternatives are what's called a MAC system, or a Managed Assigned Counsel, which also includes the necessary staffing of county offices and county department positions, but continues to deliver the services mainly through contracted services with public defenders. We also think that the MAC system addresses the most critical challenges that were identified by the report from the OSPD. And included in the report, not only is the MAC system, but there are two options for the MAC system. One of them is a basic system, which actually establishes the least amount of county positions, but does provide a county department head and a community stakeholder for the public defense. The enhanced MAC system adds a few more county positions and requires less contracted services. The basic MAC system is an estimated cost of $1,037,140. The enhanced MAC system has an estimated cost of $1,136,776. The fully staffed Public Defender's Office is an increase of 106% on the current cost. The basic MAC system is 62% increase, and the enhanced MAC is a 78% increase. The other option, of course, is status quo under the current system with the contracted PDs, and the cost is approximately $640,000. One thing that's also pointed out in this report is that if you establish a public defender's office, there's a possibility that the county would be eligible for funding through grants. Under the current system of contracted services, we are not eligible for grant funding. Some of the primary challenges that were identified through the OSPD report that I want you to be aware of are the caseloads are too high, the recruitment challenges for the attorneys locally, the current system causes delays in services and lacks coordination of services, accountability to clients, the board, and the public, lack of resources, and absence of a designated stakeholder. And under the MAC system, we believe that that system addresses all of those challenges. And I'll turn it over to the board for any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Neil. Is there any questions or comments from the board? Tom?
I just have one, that you just said something, we establish an office that we would have more availability to grant funding. Would that be with this, one of the MACs, either the basic or the enhanced? Or is that a full-blown office?
Either one of the MAC systems as well.
Supervisor Howard?
No, Supervisor Wilson, go, that's fine.
Supervisor Wilson?
Yep. I wasn't here at the time on the board when the first presentation was given. My experience has been and continues to be with our current system in place. It is affording, one of the major concerns was not affording to the indigent the best possible defense. And I can tell you, in my experience here in Delaware County, over all the years in law enforcement and the time going to court, is that our public defenders have been very well dealt with, and their experience level far exceeded that of our district attorney's office. There was far more experience in the public defender service, and it currently is that way today. Some of the public defenders we have are ex-DAs that have been with the DA's office or have been public defenders in the past and have gone to private service. So the level of experience and talent in the public defender currently in Delaware County is well served. I mean, we are not seeing inexperienced public defense out there. If anything, we suffer more on the public defender side, or on the DA side, from having that experience in the DA's office as opposed to what we're seeing in our public defense. And that's great. I mean, we need to have good public defense, and we're doing very well with what we currently have. Could there be augmentations? I'm sure there could. And the discussions that you have had with the public defender, those in the current contract, I'd love to hear what their recommendations are to you outside of this, but for me, the status quo would be my recommendation at this time.
Supervisor Howard?
Thank you. And Neil, I might need some help answering some of these questions, but I think that was the point of Laura Arroyo's presentation here to the board last year from that new Office of State Public Defender. If I recall correctly, and Neil, you could help me out with this, basically, compared to other counties, her statement that hit me the most was that we had too many indigents per sitting public defender. Was that a correct memory on my part? I know this was last year, 7, 8 months ago, but walk me through that piece of it again.
Yes, that's correct. One of the findings from the report is the caseload is too high for our current PDs. I believe that our current felony attorneys each have over 200 cases. I think one is 260, the other around 220. The misdemeanor attorneys currently carry about 130-something apiece for cases. So yes, that was one of the findings. The caseloads are too high.
What was the, remind me, she had an appropriate level or balance to caseload per public defender. What was that at the time?
I don't recall offhand what the actual case number that she recommended. I can look at the report real quick if you'd like me to.
Well, I'm hoping Ellie will remember. But yeah, I appreciate that. Sorry, Neil, I kind of surprised you on that one. I guess the root of what we're seeing here is the State Public Defender's Office is trying to divert folks out of our jail into alternative methods of correcting behavioral issues, so our jails aren't so highly impacted. And in this case, our jails have been highly impacted, especially over the last several years, more so than or actually it was more so than any other county in the state in her report. So there was some balance that needed to occur, and she felt her job was to inform us based on the data that we're way out of balance on diverting, and at the root of that was getting the right public defender to actually have some level of discussion with their attorney that was going to get them diverted out of that system. I don't know what that right balance is, but what I didn't see on this was an option that allowed us to add a public defender to the equation here. I know we have 2 misdemeanor public defenders, we have 2 felony public defenders. I know that the judges might not necessarily be happy with that equation as it currently stands, because if something happens to both of our felony public defenders, then the misdemeanor defenders can't take those cases, I guess the way it's split up. But what I would like to see potentially this board discuss today and maybe down the road is what would it look like cost-wise to add additional public defender seat. I'm really not thinking, because it's worked well in my opinion, that the oversight piece is necessary. What we really need to do is change how we're doing business in diverting folks from our jail to get them the necessary resources that are going to change the behavior instead of sitting in jail and doing time. I'm not sure if that's the best way to approach this, but what would it cost for an extra public defender? If I break it down just evenly, it's about $159,000 per public defender right now as it currently stands. If we were to add that on, that would be not a significant additional cost, even actually significantly less than our basic MAC as it's currently outlined in this proposed budget. So I'm not sure if there's willingness to discuss that, but to me, we need to hit it at the root of the problem, which is getting folks the right level of public defense instead of having their cases maybe plead out. Just a thought.
Thank you, Supervisor Howard. Supervisor Borges?
So that was, I guess I kind of have the same question for a fourth option. I think you were referring to an additional contracted public defender. Is that what you mean? Okay. So yeah, I guess my question is that an option to address a lot of these issues that we're already having is just by lessening the workload per PD? And then my second question is going to be long-term, if we choose one of the other options, financially looking forward, is that going to impact us? On what level would that impact us, and can we absorb it? And moving forward, keep it funded?
If you go with any of the alternatives from the current system, it's a significant increased cost long-term. If you develop the PD office, we would start with creating the position for a public defender, a chief public defender, which would be an appointed department head, like your other department heads in the county structure. It would be up to them as the subject matter expert to kind of develop what their staff looks like from there. We would also encourage creating a support system staff initially, and then again, like I said, let the PD do the assessment of the current system and develop their structure from there. But under that system, it kind of touches on what Supervisor Wilson was mentioning, is that it would keep the contracted attorneys that we have now that have experience in providing public defense for our indigents. With you creating a new office, you are hiring brand-new attorneys. So one of the challenges that were mentioned were the delivery of services through the current system. And we also think that having a PD manages some of those challenges by having somebody who's actually accountable for providing those services locally, and it creates a community stakeholder as well. So there's somebody that the board has to hold accountable for those services and delivering those services. But yes, it is an ongoing cost. Creating positions is permanent unless you dissolve the office.
Thank you, Neil. All good comments and questions. I'm going to open this up for public comment.
Just a second. One of the major issues that we have within the judicial system is there's only limited amount of time in our courts because we have limited judge. We're supposed to have 3.5. We only have two full-time judges and a third in traffic. So at this point in time, it's very difficult to get cases processed through the system because we constantly have a backlog. Most of the individuals that we have sitting in a jail, not as many pre-sentenced, as many as are waiting, and those that have already been sentenced to serving out jail time and for primarily violent offenses, very few in there for otherwise. So again, you can put more towards the individuals into public defense, but it's not going to change the equation because what we have is a continuous backlog within our judicial system that causes much of this sitting in our jails waiting for your trial to come to the courts because again we have this backlog of lack of court time, lack of judges that allow us to move effectively through the system. So anyway, you can have 200 cases, but the fact that you're not going to be actually dealing with that it's over an extended period of time. So.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with the observation you're making, and that's how the system's currently working. But I think the idea that was put in place by Laura Arroyo was to change this nature of repeat customers by moving upstream. So diverting them into programs that allow them to stay away from the life that is causing this backlog, not only in the courts, not only in the public defender's office, but also in our jail. At some point, we need to figure out how to move upstream to change the behavior of the folks that are becoming incarcerated and plugging up the system. I think that's what we need to do in order to find that better balance. And if it starts with the public defender's office in allowing for more time to be spent per indigent and really hatching out how best to divert their attention to programs that help them get on the right side of the law, then that might be the best approach. But, again, we've got to start somewhere. But what we're doing, status quo, I don't believe is working and hasn't for several years, just based on our current baseline. And our current baseline is the worst in the state, at least as she's presented it to this board.
Supervisor Howard, to circle back to your question earlier about caseload, the information provided by Ms. Arroyo in her report was 54 to 74 felonies for one attorney. And currently our felony attorneys have over 200.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, I'll open this up for public comment. Do we have any public comment on this item? Yes, I actually would. Yes.
Thank you. I really appreciate that this is being reviewed. I think it's incredibly critical.
Ellie, just for the record, for people
My name is
watching.
Ellie Hoops.
Thank you.
I am one of the contracted public defenders. I have a primary misdemeanor and juvenile calendar. One of the things I do think that should be highlighted is the juvenile caseload is not commented on at all. I do think it's extremely burdensome. It needs a lot of focus. The board has heard a lot about the juvenile hall, us responding to our children. is one of the ways that we're responding to our adults as well. So some of this has to be looked at in a way is how we're looking at costs, what those costs are. And having us pay for a public defender system can really mitigate other costs. So costs on jail, costs on treatment, costs on homelessness, cost on drug addiction. If we can get these services in place in a different way, we may really be mitigating all of those types of costs. So I think that to recognize that the public defenders are the ones that are at the front line communicating with the people who really are ill. And I think that's one way for us to look at it. We obviously have ongoing criminals that are going to end up in the prison system, but we have those that are going to be back in this community, and those are the ones that the jail is generally dealing with first and foremost. It is getting clogged with those types of cases. Those are the ones that are not getting sent out to the prisons that are the really violent crimes. And so how do we deal with that? I do think having a centralized place where we can do funding, how we structure that, and I hear here we do need more bodies, we need more people. I think all of the caseloads are overwhelming for the public defenders, whether it's misdemeanors and a conservancy caseload, a misdemeanor and juvenile caseload, or a felony caseload. We do need more people doing the work because there is work outside of the courtrooms that need to be dealt with. We need to actually meet with our clients. We need to actually find out what is going on if we're going to be making it so that we fix some of these issues. And that means that there's been a burden on the jail trying to make sure that those visits can take place. All of these different things take a longer conversation than can happen right here. And having a stakeholder that can bring some of those responses to the table so that we do all of those better, I think is important. Not just the courtroom work, but everything else. And that means having social workers that can be making sure that services are coming in, making sure that we have investigators so we find out what are the actual facts of cases. One of the reasons we have the system we have that is supposed to be in the courtroom is that we don't necessarily know the truth. We need to be able to advocate so that we find the truth. That means having investigators. Felony attorneys are mandated to have an investigator. That's not included in any of the funding, and yet they are prima facie failing to meet the needs of their clients if they don't have those types of things. So there are a lot of areas that need to have a broader conversation. I see my time is running out. I don't know if you want me to continue or not.
Yeah, you're
but-
an employee of the office and
Okay.
bring us good information, so.
Okay, thank you. I didn't want to take up too much time. So I do think that making sure that we, and I also want to say, I think that the information that was provided today by the department is correct. We do have those things that we need to do. We need to have training. We need to be able to deal with the fact, every single factor that was mentioned is something that needs to be fixed, including having the number of lawyers. How that is structured, I think that we want to bring that back to the table is what it sounds like. I think that if we just create an office of young attorneys, that's not going to work. But we do, and thank you for saying that the public defenders are experienced. I think that that's really important to note. But there are only 4. And we have 4 that are seasoned. So what's going to happen in 10 years? We need to have people that we can bring in so that we continue to develop the program. And that takes having some cohesion, and so we don't just have individual offices, but some way of making sure that we continue to have a good product. And the only way that that can happen is to bring other people in, not starting from scratch, but actually building a tiered system of some sort. So we have those types of things that are going on. So I think that having a centralized administration that is going to have an investigator, have an admin so that we make sure that the numbers are correct. I know that the misdemeanor numbers are not. And I think having an administrator focusing on that stuff and handling it properly would make it so that we would know what our data is better. It's not that those things aren't being dealt in the courtroom, but is that information getting to you? And so that would assure that those things happened. Making sure that we had a social worker who knows everybody that's in the social work department. It's hard for a lawyer. A lawyer's not even allowed to speak to some of those people. So if you have a social worker on your staff, you're not having an attorney sort of leveraging on somebody, forcing them to do something. You can have people that understand each other's language, that can bring services so that we can make things happen better. Having investigators who can issue subpoenas, have that skill set. And this is all time that an attorney cannot do and that you don't want to pay an attorney to do. And so I think that recognizing that the cost structure and having a closer look at what that is important. So again, I'm here to answer any questions, and I think that those are the main things that I think having a stakeholder that can sit down with you, sit down with the community, sit down with the departments, the judges, the DA, make sure that we have a balanced conversation and so that all of the information is made, make sure that we have somebody communicating with the defendant so we know what is needed, and then in addition, making sure that we have a system that can grow. I think that those are some of the critical things that can make it so that the cost is not going to be as expensive as it looks at first blush. Are there any questions, or is there anything else that you'd like me to address right now?
So based on your comments, Ellie, it seems as if you're leaning toward the MAC structure.
I think that at this point that would be necessary. I commend Arroyo's recommendation. I don't know that we have the ability to do that. We don't have a building. We don't have that kind
Right,
of...
our infrastructure's
If we
lacking.
could build to that in 10 years, that would be fabulous.
So, but you keep mentioning, because we've been provided with two options, basic and enhanced. And I really believe that a centralized investigator, a legal secretary, those things are real necessary. But that just ups our price by quite a bit, $100,000 or so. So out of those two options, you've looked under which you prefer, an enhanced MAC system, and do you know if your colleagues also prefer that?
I think that probably they do. I know from speaking to some of my colleagues that they are completely overwhelmed at this point. And so, getting other staff and other attorneys would be critical if we kept the system as it is. But they still aren't able to respond. They still don't have an investigator. And so if we want to make sure, and the thing is that in the end, the county is also liable. So if you're going to be hiring attorneys and you know they don't have investigators, that's a problem. These are things that need to be dealt with so that we all as a whole are dealing with these issues. You want to make sure that the system is intact so that the county is safe, the people are safe. And I think that right now is a really interesting time to be doing it. And so having that centralized system like a MAT system is probably a place to start, and make sure that we actually have stakeholders that are going to all of these different things and have somebody that can focus on developing and help develop both directions. Because if you have 4 individuals, they may develop themselves, but are they developing the system? And 4 isn't quite enough. I also think that recognizing that we all are focused on our kids, and I know I bring it up, and I am the juvenile attorney, and the reason I'm doing it is because it's important. That's why I choose to do that. By doing that, that means our grandparents are focused on them. That means our parents are focused on them. And we have a real problem of addiction that's going on in this community where grandparents are bringing up kids now. And there's a reason for that. Their children are in prison, their children are getting treatment. So I think that recognizing that we need to have a more holistic response in the Public Defender's Office as well is going to help our community. And so that's the way I look at it. We're all really working for the same thing, which is a healthy community. It isn't just, a strong defense, which is obviously critical, but it's also having a healthy community. So I guess my direct answer was Matt, but it blurred out.
Any other
Anything else?
questions or comments for Ellie?
So with the, the basic MAC, I guess we assume that it's going to be ever growing and ever developing. So is that a better place to start and then let someone who knows what they're doing build their office as needed, as a department head of that branch? They're going to come and say, hey, we need this person and we're going to need this person. But
It's
for us to start right off the bat and just, give you a handful of people and make do with it, would it be a better start at the basic and then let that defender build it from there?
I think that in either case, it's going to have to be built. So if there are people, right now, we don't have people that are necessarily experts in these areas that are trying to figure it out, and with all the heart in the world, they just don't have the experience. And so yes, you want to have someone with experience that is creating the system, and that makes good sense.
Supervisor Howard, did you have any questions or comments for Ellie?
Not at this time.
Okay, well, thank you, Ellie.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
the information and everything you brought for us. Is there any other public comment on this item?
Hi, Robert Dorigo. Yeah, I've always noticed in the budget that it's lopsided between the DA and the public defender. I didn't know that the public defender was just contracted, so you're probably paying twice as much. for the service, so each individual might get half the service, you know. The city was doing that too. They were contracting for their city lawyer, and they figured out they could save money by actually just hiring a lawyer instead of contracting through a law firm. And we need a lot of public defense here because we've got this big net. You spend a lot of money on law enforcement. July 4th, you know, the 4th of July, one of my customers was charged with attempted murder. He came in and bought pot 2 days later. You know, the next day I sent a lawyer to him. I realized, you know, the poor guy works. He's not going to make it to work. He's going to lose his job. You know, a lawyer goes in, looks like the guy's got a few bucks, and they looked at the charges and dropped them. You know, he really was up against a little gang of people, you know. He was actually the second one of my customers who was charged with attempted murder in a few months, one against a cop. Also, he is out and charges dropped. Another one of our customers came in the other day, and he had been in jail for 2 months. He's homeless. He gets an Airbnb when he's got extra money. He walks with a cane. He's very stiff and in pain a lot of the time, and he was sleeping in someone's breezeway in the rain, and he's so used to such a fucked up system that he just, instead of pleading not guilty for resisting arrest, he just said, a speedy trial, yes please. And he spent two months staying warm, I guess, huh? Because his Airbnbs kind of make an uncompetitive advantage for you guys against the people who have to rent homes to live in, and so it makes it so that people have a harder time affording. When I started this, the first time I came in here, Dean Wilson was here as the sheriff, talking about how we needed to keep medical pot banned. And I came in and spoke, a lot of us came in and spoke, and about a week later, because of me coming in and speaking, I had officers Rivera and Tanias in plain clothes at my home telling me that my 100 square foot shed, I had an 800 square foot post-imperial family home, looked common to the type to procreate cannabis. And so I walked them around and I showed them. I was nervous as hell, kind of like we always are facing the government, you know. If they had found a plant, it would have been legal, but you have spent so much money on this department where really most of them have never read the Constitution. You know, they couldn't cite it or anything, you know, or maybe their favorite parts. And so I would have needed a public defender if they just found a couple plants, probably, you know, even though I would have been within my rights. And so we really need a robust public defender, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the board for any further comments or considerations.
Yeah, I guess, again, and I'm going to go back to this, there's no question in my mind that we need another public defender. I don't know how we do that because it's not considered in any of the current makeup of what we have before us today. Is there a specific timeline that we need to react to this at this point? Because this is just how we directed you after Laurel Arroyo reported out to us. And she was with us a couple times, and I know she met with most of us individually. But we do need to do something. I just don't know what that is, and I'd like to have a broader discussion about it, because this is really the first time we've, as a board, have had an opportunity to kick it back in front of the community and see where we should go. But my priorities right now are getting some assistance to the 4 PDs that are currently there by having another staff person help to reduce that caseload, at least get it closer to average for the state. Just my thoughts.
Thank you.
We are discussed in my first comments is, you know, I'm in favor of maintaining what it is. However, from your comments earlier, you have had discussions with the PDs and have come up with potentially some solutions to the problems that they have that aren't included in what we have. And I really would like to hear those things as we go forward. My other concern is you know, we're heading into more difficult economic times, and facing increases of operational cost all across our boards this upcoming year. So again, looking at the financials going forward before I make any decision, you know, especially with what we're presented with as the alternatives on that selection of 3, I'm definitely open to looking at additional, you know, personnel, contract personnel, maybe other contracts with investigators if necessary. However, I'm not in favor of any of the other alternatives that are currently on that list at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Starkey.
Would a contracted investigator work with contracted attorneys?
I know that that would be helpful, yes.
Okay,
I think that we need to have admin, social worker, and
absolutely, I do too. But
Chair,
Yeah,
if she's going to respond, can she talk in the mic
Yeah,
so the people
she's go-
watching
yeah.
online?
Oh, it's fine. She answered that she does think a contracted investigator could work, but she also does believe that you need the structure of an entire office.
Chair,
thank you.
if the board would like to give staff direction to come back with narrowed alternatives, I can kind of take the feedback of what Supervisor Howard is saying and Supervisor Wilson. The staff recommendation before you today is the MAC system, the base MAC system, to start out with that. But we could look at adding the additional costs that Supervisor Howard's talking about, an additional attorney, a contracted investigator, maybe some other kind of support systems that we can put in place for the current PDs, bring that structure back to you as the current structure, and then the MAC system. Then you'd only have 2 options to discuss, so it kind of narrows that down and kind of combines a couple of the options that are before you today.
I think that'd be prudent. I mean, what I recall from the presentation that we had was that because of the overburdened public defenders, the accusation is that we're incarcerating more per capita by quite a bit because of that. So it's kind of making the accusation that people aren't getting an adequate defense. So I think your suggestion, Neil, is right on point. I agree with Supervisor Howard that just plainly reducing the caseload is something that is necessary. I wonder where the funding's going to come from. That's where the question always goes when we talk about things, is where's the money going to come from? So bringing back something that would give us a couple of options for exploring this a little deeper is I think the right thing to go, or right place to go.
Yeah, and Chair, just to expand on that a little, I'd also like some exploration in the broad list of potential options that would come out of any opioid settlement dollars if they could be used in programs that work through the PD's office. Obviously, we have a lot of drug cases that come through that office. If there's a connection there that can be made, that's a potential budget solution, both post-treatment and obviously getting them into treatment with whatever settlement is reached with our courts. So just some thoughts there out loud, and if you could explore that with County Council, that would be super helpful.
Very good. We know where we're going then.
Yeah, I'd also like to point out just really quickly that even though the different systems were presented in a certain way today, the basic MAC, the enhanced MAC, those are not set in stone by any means. It was kind of our best guess on what the 2 systems would look like. This is new to all of us, so we're kind of creating these based on current staffing levels, current staffing salary ranges for other department heads, like county departments that are like county council and DA's office. So that's where we kind of drew our numbers from, so it is brand new to all of us. The basic MAC doesn't necessarily have to not have an investigator. If that's one of the primary hurdles that the PDs are pointing out, we could include an investigator in that system as well, just to make that clear.
Yes, I understood, and I wanted to say I appreciate the time and effort put into that report. It was very well done. So with that, I guess we'll be talking about this again in the future. For now, we will move on to item number 19. Under general government items, receive an update on the juvenile hall by the chief probation officer and take action on the recommendation to order the closure of the Delaware County Juvenile Hall as a custodial institution no later than June 30th, 2023.
Good morning, Board.
Good morning, Lonnie.
I have a brief update similar to last month, just to give you an idea of what we've been doing at the hall. So current housing of youth, as of today, we have 3 in custody. All of those are in Humboldt County. We're, again, using Humboldt County primarily, only using Shasta County when cases meet those criteria that need specific programming, or for some reason Humboldt doesn't have the capacity. We've not hit that issue yet since we've been able to transition kids out of Shasta. And that's the second point as well. Housing is always going to be dependent on bed availability and staffing that Humboldt County has, and then we'll start looking elsewhere to house kids if we need to. Coordination regarding that is ongoing regarding visits with family and attorneys, coordination with Humboldt County Juvenile Hall staff and probation staff on what their capacity is, what issues they're having, how our kids are doing, what needs they have. I know that Emily Johnson, my supervising JCO, or I'm sorry, supervising DPO of the Juvenile Services Unit, has made a trip down late last week, I believe, to touch base with one youth in particular that she wanted to connect with and have a conversation with. So that's all happening both in county with our partners and with Humboldt County as well. Staffing on the department side. So we walked down probation, juvenile hall, and support services divisions. We've had two applicants for DPO. One was DQ'd out of the gate, and one will be moved on to interviews and testing. That's not scheduled yet, but that's upcoming. This Thursday for juvenile hall JCOs, we do have panel interviews scheduled. HR let me know this morning we have 4 candidates that they've heard back from. 2 will be scheduled for Thursday. They have to reschedule the other 2 for a different time, and 1 they haven't heard from yet. So hopefully we'll get an answer there. In support services, we do have 1 legal clerk that's accepted an offer and has a start date. The other is in backgrounds, and so that would help fill up our legal clerk side as well. We had interviews yesterday for senior account clerk, which we've not had for some time, and we had 2 good candidates. That would be super helpful as well in filling out the support side.
Good news.
Might have to have help from the back. I think I skipped a slide. There we go. JCO recruitment history. So last year I received data from HR on what our recruitment history for JCOs had been, and in the last couple weeks I received an update on those numbers, and so I wanted to let you know where we were at. So since July 2020, we've gone through 6 or more cycles. Essentially, it's been open until filled, those positions. HR will close out and refly so that we have batches. They did that for quite some time. In recent months, I don't believe they're actually even closing it. They're taking a group of applicants and moving them through the process. So we've essentially had an open recruitment since July of 2020. In that time, we've had 93 qualified applicants. 35 have showed up for initial testing and interviews. In conversations with Kathy Hafterson, she said that some of the, and I don't know if these are specific to JCOs, but countywide, some applications that she's seeing come through the system that we're using, they have names and dates of birth, but even no work history or anything like that. So on my part, that's sad because folks are putting in applications that they don't intend on following up on. So that's why I think we see some of those numbers coming down from applicants to folks who actually show up. And it sounds like that's an issue in other areas of the county as well. 13 of those 35 made it to final interviews. We made offers on 11 of those in that time period, and 2 have been hired. The ones that out of those 11 offers, the 9 that weren't hired, 5 didn't pass backgrounds. 4 declined the offer when it was made once we got through the background process. I know 2 of those took other positions in the county. Honestly, without digging through records, I don't recall what the reasons were for the other 2 declining. But that's how those numbers broke down. And lastly, as you know, given our current operations, workload's uncertain. We have been able to stand up a couple programs as we discussed last month, talking to Jordan Anderson and staff at the hall. They have had capacity to do that, and so we've got our Paxton program going. That's our building skills program, so we have 6 youth in that right now, along with a couple journaling programs that operate on Saturday and Sunday. I got an email from my program coordinator yesterday, and after a couple weeks, she's looking at expanding that, adding another program on Sunday, I think, so we'll end up with 2 3 different programming, journaling programming groups coming up in April. But despite that, it's frustrating for staff. We had help yesterday with testing in the office, purging files, things like that. But without kids in custody, it leaves a struggle in finding things for them to do. And we're doing our best to find spots for that. The reality is, in my opinion, special purpose operations, they're not sustainable in this structure. That's been my conversations with other chiefs around the state who have operated special purpose facilities. They have had their place at times, but long term they're extraordinarily difficult to sustain in operating that way. And that definitely has an impact on what staff are going through right now, the uncertainty of the situation, trying to figure out how to put the pieces together and find different rhythms as we have to go through different operational structures. That's just extraordinarily difficult. I think they're doing well given the circumstances. They're showing up for work. They're putting in the work that's needed, but it is nonetheless stressful. So that's my update for the month. In conversations with Supervisor Borges, he did request that we also add to the agenda a discussion on closing the juvenile hall, or direction for closing the juvenile hall, more accurately. I won't reiterate my report that I gave last October. That was fairly extensive, and I have that to refer to if you have any questions on what my recommendations were or the information or how we came to that recommendation as well. So I'm at your disposal.
Thank you. Chief Raymond, any comments or questions from the board for the chief?
So the only comment I have is again, same comment I made last time. You know, I feel we need to make a decision and finally close the juvenile hall. This last February, we had about 144 hours of supervised time where we actually had in custodies being supervised by the staff in hand. We spent approximately $60,000, almost 59 and change $1,000 in February last month, paying for the staff to be there for that 96-hour period of time. Unfortunately, only 144 of that was actually, you know, supervising custodies. So, correct. Again, I think giving you the flexibility, if we close this the facility and giving you the flexibility to utilize your staff, we can still cover that 144 hours as needed, but we're not going to have the staff having to attend an empty building for most of the time, that they can be put to other resources, putting on programs, doing truancy, doing warrant checks, et cetera, as you see fit. But hopefully we can move in that direction. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess I requested to bring this back up since it was tabled in October, I believe it was. I just feel it's time. We've given enough time to see if we could get employment, and it's not fair to the current staff to just sit in limbo. It's not fair to you to just sit in limbo. So I think it's time that we make a decision and give a clear, direct path that we're taking, and we take those steps and move forward.
Well, thank you. So no other comments for the chief then? No. Okay.
I just have a couple questions. Has the Board of Supervisors, either this board or the previous board, come to you and say, hey, we need to cut costs. We need you to figure out a way to reduce the costs. Therefore, can you look at closing juvenile hall?
That has not been the case outside of in 2021. There was a request that we explore the possibility of converting the juvenile hall to a jail facility.
Okay. And the budget team has not ever asked that?
No.
So in a lot of ways, this isn't about the money. And, you know, and I understand that it's sometimes a tough pill to swallow to spend, you know, over $1 million on 3 or 4 kids. So I get that. But I'm just going to say my piece, and I don't have a lot to say. Everybody knows where I stand on this issue. And I draw from how I come to that conclusion is just based on my own firsthand experience working in a healthy probation department for close to 30 years, where I've written over thousands of pre-sentence reports, thousands of disposition reports. I've arrested hundreds of probation violators, but I've also attended hundreds of graduations from when they've gotten the services that they needed. I helped develop a multiple of services within a juvenile hall. So I'm very familiar, I have firsthand experience on that. But I also want to just say, and I'm hoping not to get emotional when I say this, is that I have considered and I believe the reports that have come from the JJC. And just to reiterate that, the JJC is a mandated legislative body with members who have been appointed by a superior court with the purpose to act as public conscience for those who provide services to our children, our youth, and the families in the juvenile justice and dependency systems. And they also make recommendations for improving the delivery of services. The JJC has come to us twice in the past 5 years and reported their concerns. I want you to know that I see you, I believe you, and I'm sorry that it's coming to this. So that is all I have to say.
Thank you. Lonnie, I do have a question. I would like to see the board consider, obviously taking into account personnel challenges right now, consider the long-term goal of keeping the hall open, because it's the best, I think it's probably the best thing for our kids. Again, noting those personnel challenges currently, so we, as an action item, could possibly suspend operations as a detention facility and continue the programs to help our caseload, the kids now, with programs for diversion. You know, hopefully see some more of those graduations. Have you given that kind of idea any thought? What would be the downside or the good side of that kind of an idea?
Suspension of operations is something that I discussed with the chief in Lassen County, actually. They were at the point where they, from what I understand, didn't have enough JCOs to continue operations. They were operating most of the time with DPOs. And so that is the process that they went through, and ultimately it ended in closure of their juvenile hall as well. My intention is never, this is a bad solution, but it's the best solution that I can see. And I don't know if that makes sense. I don't want to close juvenile hall. I think juvenile hall is beneficial for our community. But at the same time, I've not found a pathway to actually sustain operating it as it stands. In my recommendation to close it, I recognize that things never remain static, and it's very possible. I suppose the need is there. That has not changed. I believe the need will continue to be there throughout time. The question is, can we functionally operate it as a facility for our community? My answer now is no, but in my recommendation to close, I do want to take steps so that we can maintain the facility in such a state that should the time come when we can realize the operation of it to meet the need of the community, we can open it without jumping through significant hurdles of building a brand, the same issues we're facing with the jail. How do we build a brand new jail? That's a huge lift for the community. And I don't want that same obstacle in place if we get to that point where we believe we can functionally operate a juvenile hall. So in a sense, in a long-term perspective, that is what I'm asking for. On a short-term suspension, shutting down custody right now and operating with call it a reentry team for a short-term period, that could be possible. The challenge I see on the staffing side is I don't have enough work for the staff that I have to make that a viable option. I don't have a solution for what to do with my 2 cooks if we shut down custody locally, even for a short period of time. Right now, I have 6 JCOs. I don't foresee the need for 6 officers in a reentry team. And so that's the thing I butt up against. If there's a pathway through that, I'm open to exploring it. But again, in looking at the possible solutions and pathways through, I've not found that as a viable option in that sense of we're going to do a short-term suspension and see how this goes. In a sense, I think that would be putting things in order. Right now, the way I look at it, we've got the cart before the horse. We're trying to operate part-time custody with custodial staff, but not having anything for them to do, we try and plug in workload that is appropriate, rather than making them reentry staff whose primary purposes are programming and transport for custody without the obligation of running a custodial institution. And so I think that order would be more correct. I just don't know how I would make use of all of the staff that I have and do them justice and saying we're going to suspend and we'll see what happens. I think in some respect, although it would probably be better and more in line with what I think we can do, I think we would still leave staff in limbo. I think we would still leave the department in limbo regarding what the ultimate outcome of this is going to be for the foreseeable future. I don't know if that answers your question. I don't know if you have specific thoughts on how we could implement something like that, but again, I'm open to it.
So you don't believe that your custodial staff could be part of the reentry team like you?
I absolutely do, but under my recommendation, this is an entirely new unit, an entirely new job description, much of which already aligns with what a JCO would do. So yes, I think they're appropriate. I think their skill sets that they have can be applied in that position. But right now I have 6 officers and 2 support staff. I don't know how I could find positions for them under that structure to keep them employed. That's the struggle that I've got right now.
I was hoping that that kind of idea or decision on suspension of operations would actually increase morale, have a kind of an official position that, yes, we do want to keep the hall open.
Yeah.
Yes, we understand that it's a struggle finding personnel to man it. So we're going to keep working on manning it, and at a point where we do have enough, we're going to open it up again. That's kind of the thought, rather than leave them out there in limbo and have that uncertainty of, am I going to have a job tomorrow or not? You know, so that's where my thoughts were coming from with that line of questioning. So I guess my question is, what is it about the special purchase?
Special purpose.
Special purchase. I said it again. Purpose.
Purpose. Yeah.
Sorry. What is it about that that's not sustainable? Is it the same idea that you're talking about, that you don't have enough
Essentially, yes.
for your people to do? Or?
Because reality is, those 3 youth that we have in custody in Humboldt County, those are not short-term detentions. Those are long-term detentions. And operating as a special purpose, I can't hold them here locally. It doesn't, one of the discussions that's been had is running a special purpose. Do we go down and pick them up and bring them back for the weekend and take them back so our staff would have something to do? That was discussed early on last year in considering the possibility of this. But that doesn't do justice to those kids either, because it removes them from an environment where they're building relationships, they're plugging into programs, in this case in Humboldt County, bringing them back for 3 to 4 days and then moving them back again, and they just get bounced back and forth. The requirements to meet school requirements, have them in school, specific numbers of hours. That gets jacked with. And it's, in my opinion, it's not a good outcome for the kids at that point. Operating it in light of that leaves us in the position where, as Supervisor Wilson said, we had 145 custodial hours last month. 10 bed days when we break it down. We had 150 bed days last month. We had 10 bed days locally. And in the cases I've looked at in other counties, Trinity County ran a special purpose for many years. Mariposa County still has a special purpose on the books. I've talked to now the retired, who's the interim, chief in Mariposa, specifically about this, how he managed to have a special purpose. And I included that information in my report. Chief Judy's been involved in probation since 1995, a long time. And his experience was that it was much more expensive and much more difficult to operate a special purpose. And in his case in Mariposa, they didn't operate it on a weekly basis. They opened it when they had a custodial booking. So they would hold the youth in custody, get them to court, and then transport them out or release once that court hearing was held. And so they operated on an as-needed basis. Trinity County operated differently. They did try and run, I believe it was weekends. They would open up and close on a regular basis. And eventually they shut down the special purpose, and they're contract only now for the same challenges of having work for the staff to do. Ultimately, the expense versus, in this case, the expense versus the actual benefit, which is very limited when you have kids in custody locally during those periods of time. Yeah, we can continue to operate it as a special purpose, but I don't think it brings a whole lot of benefit to our community in doing that. Not enough to outweigh the cost, both financially and on staff. Because there's no way to guarantee that I have a kid that's going to come into custody at any given point, and they have their job to do. Operating with a reentry unit that is primarily meant to deal with custody transports for kids that do require detention, and as a huge part of their job duties, running programs in that structure, I think that could be sustainable. That, I said it last year, I think we're playing defense, and we've been playing defense for a long time. I think changing to a reentry structure, that allows us the opportunity to play offense. We have to change what we do, and that's extraordinarily difficult and not easy, and not what I would like to do. But honestly, I'd be doing you and the community a disservice if I didn't come to you and say, this is the issue I have, and this is my recommendation. If I came to you with a problem and no solution, I personally hate that when people walk into my office and say, here's the problem, fix it. And they have no idea, no thought put to how we might do that. I would be negligent in my duties to you and the community if I didn't present you the best solution that I think I can come up with. Not to say it's a good one, but I don't think there are any good ones right now.
Thank you, Lonnie. I appreciate your responses.
So I have just a quick question on the transport team. So if the hall was completely closed here and your transport team is implemented fully, the way you predict it could be, does that limit the amount of kids that get taken into custody, or is it the same whether if we had a hall here or the hall in Humboldt? I mean, are you like, well, we don't feel like driving today, so that kid's not going to go? Is there any difference in kids being incarcerated?
No, there should not be. And that's one of those issues that'll have to be navigated with the law enforcement partners in the community, because by the nature of the hall closing, it can absolutely be perceived that, well, we can't detain any youth any longer. But that's not the reality of what the needs of our community is at the same time. trying not to speak out of school too much because I haven't had an opportunity to debrief this with my staff fully, but we had an incident last week where youth needed to be detained. We had absolutely the capacity to detain them. Our risk tool that we use now and would continue to use would tell us that those youth should be released once they come into our custody. And so there were some issues that had to be worked out between my department and the sheriff's office. And ultimately, I think it came out the way it should. But it's a very different paradigm to not have a place to book a kid, especially when you have a tool that you're using to determine appropriate detention or not that tells you those kids should be released. So those processes, even though they're in place, I call it learning the rhythm of the room, in a sense. Every situation has its own rhythm, how people interact, how people operate and move through that. And we're struggling to figure out the rhythm of this, even now. And I won't pretend that it will be easy, and a decision, if you make it today, would solve that issue. But I think it can be done. Those youth that need to be detained and arrested need to be detained and arrested. Once they come into my custody, we have to make an appropriate decision on, do we need long-term detention until they show up in front of a judge, or can we reasonably release them into the community until they show up in front of a judge? And we'll have to work through those processes, and sometimes, most of the time, I think we'll nail it. Sometimes we will struggle and trip along the way, and we'll have to get back up and figure out how to do the process better.
Well, thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. I'm going to open this item up for public comment at this time. Is there any public comment on this item?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Norma Williams, Chapter President, Delaware County Employees Association, SEIU 10-1. Since this came up last year in October, you know that I've come before you. You already know what I'm going to say. That hasn't changed. However, I know that you have to weigh benefits versus costs. I, however, weigh the most important, and that is the individual, the people who actually are working at the hall, who I believe should be commended for their years of service, and that's the JCOs and the support staff, as well as the DPOs who come in and also assist when needed, and trust me, they have come in and worked long hours at the hall, as well as the facility manager, Jordan, as well as the chief. I've been over there and I have actually seen the chief up in the control room, so I do know that he's put in hours too. I remember what it was like when Barrow closed, and that was painful. This will also be painful, because again, if you look at the report that was issued last year, we're looking at 4 for the reentry program. He said that there are 6, plus 2 support staff. So we're going to be looking at maybe, possibly losing some staff. This document is our contract, which you should all be aware of. You should all know what's in it. There will be significant changes to this contract. And there is an article in here that will apply to any who are displaced by your decision today. It is our legal due diligence and representation afforded to us by the contract, state and federal law, to advocate and represent all of these employees when your decision is made, and we will do so to the full extent of the law. We have a lot of questions that will need to be answered during this entire process. You may have a drop-dead date of June 30th. You may or may not be able to meet that, depending on how long it's going to take for the union and the employees to be satisfied, to have our answers, to have our questions answered and their rights protected per our contract, per state and federal law. Keep that in mind when you make your decision. Because as I told you, whatever, this is going to be a long process. This is totally different from what happened with Barrow. We're looking at a lot of things that are going to have to take place and be put into place. And it will involve me. And I will make damn sure that those employees are protected and represented. Thank you.
Thank you, Norma. Is there any other public comment on this item? Dave?
My name is David Dornas. I'm a commissioner with the Juvenile Justice Commission, but I'm here speaking as a private citizen, even though I'm dressed in my uniform. This is a very sad day, and it's all for naught. In the probation chief's discussion, he said he didn't want to close juvenile hall, and it was a difficult thing to come to. That's about as far from the truth as you can get. He's wanted to close juvenile hall since 2018. When he closed Barrow, he also asked the board to close or grossly reduce the hours of operation of juvenile hall. He doesn't like juvenile hall. He doesn't like having to deal with it. You're talking about a low staff that is very well orchestrated. It's taken years to accomplish what has been accomplished, but he has created an environment that is hostile to the employees that work there. He also announced in October that the hall was closing to his staff, and surprise of surprises, all kinds of people left. The population of youth in the hall has declined greatly. There's a pipeline, and I don't know what today's numbers are, but at one point there were over 70 names in that pipeline, some of them going back 6 months, that had not been processed. This was an intentional abuse to control the population of that hall, so he could come to you and say, I've got nobody in the hall as in custodies, and I've got no staff. The problem with the staffing isn't hiring. The problem with staffing is retention. You can hire people all day long, but if they turn around and leave because of the work control, the work environment, it's a never-ending thing. It worked for probation with Barrow, and they thought, why not just do it over again and do it for juvenile hall? And I'll be darned if it didn't work. I am so sad that the board, the CEO, did not look under the hood to see what that noise is in the engine, instead of trying to figure out how to get more staff and what's going on, and we can't afford this. That's not even the question. That's not the question. Juvenile hall could be a vibrant piece of our community and a godsend for the at-risk youth of this county. And we're going to toss it away because of a very well orchestrated ambush on this facility. So it is a sad day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Is there any other public comment on this item?
Paul Dillard, Chairman, Juvenile Justice Commission.
Good morning.
All of you know me by now. And I didn't talk to David. I told David I wasn't coming. And my conscience wouldn't let me. Anyway, we started down this road October 11th. And if it hadn't been for Short, Starkey, and Maston at the time asking questions, it would have been over, because that's the way it was set. Since that time, we really haven't done anything. I've asked that you expand the recruitment. You haven't. You didn't do anything. You didn't do anything. You really, most of the stuff has been me because I was here in 2017. And it's all been channeled to me and that I got a grudge. I don't have a grudge against you or Lonnie or anybody else. I want what's good for these kids. And I don't think we're getting it. And you're not honestly looking. You're looking at how to discredit me because you think I got a personal thing with Lonnie. Personally, I like Lonnie. I'd have a beer with him, but I wouldn't work for him. It just doesn't make any sense. If you look at the problem is not juvenile hall. Look at probation. You have 12 probation officers. How many you got? 5. You got 12 positions, you got 5. And they're leaving. Why are they leaving? This is a prestigious position, nationally recognized as a good, respectable job that interacts with the court. And they're leaving. They're not leaving for pay. People work for pay, but there's got to be some intrinsic rewards. They're leaving just to get the hell out for whatever reason. Not going to go there. But just recently, in the last 2 weeks, you lost a cornerstone in there who'd been there for years, and she left for less pay. You got to look at what the common thread is here. You lose staff in juvenile hall, you lose them, but you won't look at it. I ask you, I beg you, look at what the common problem is. Ask these people, have you contacted any of the people? I made a big deal about former employees. Has anybody really went out and chased down somebody and asked? Have you started an investigation? I'll answer that, no, because if you had a formal investigation, I'd have been asked questions. This is a sad day for the county. We passed a tax measure for this. Is that why we passed a tax measure? To cut out services to our youth? The residents and the youth deserve better. And as far as reentry people, you're not gaining any money there because they're already in your budget at a higher salary than correctional officers. You passed that budget in September before you talked about this in October. And the reason I know that is the chief and I had a discussion because we were looking at where we were going to go with this stuff. And it's been included in there and you've been involved in that. We believe this is a sore day in this community. Just unbelievable. And we believe that the calculations of savings will not be less than what the new positions, the new stuff, and the transportation and the impact on the court it's just not there. And it's a shame in this community, not just on you guys. It's a shame in this community that our residents won't come forward to you and talk to you. Okay? It's a shame. People don't give a damn as long as it don't affect them. Their kids are grown. We're retired. C'est la guerre.
Thank you, Paul. Is there any other public comment on this item?
Chair, I have one online.
Can we go ahead with that one?
Brandon, you are on. You just need to unmute your mic.
Hi, thank you, Board of Supervisors. I think this really illustrates, the dysfunction of what we have going on, and I sympathize with the choices that you guys have to make. They're difficult conversations and difficult solutions. Supervisor Starkey was correct in that the board was informed of potential problems, and yet the previous board failed to act. Similar to many other items and things that have gone dysfunctional, and that we have two people directly correlated with what's going on, probation and corrections. So it seems like we're missing some kind of topic here. What has changed? Why are there no kids in there? Are they not creating crimes or doing bad things? Have the laws changed? What about the kid? Why aren't we talking more about the kids' needs? But I'd just like to end my comment and request this board to act. And one way or another, move forward. So I appreciate your time and wish you good judgment in your decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I will close the public comment period at this time. Bring it back to the board for any further discussion or actions.
So I have a question that's kind of bothering me, I guess, and I don't know who can answer it for me, but we keep saying that we're doing a disservice to the youth by closing this, and it could be a, a gem to have in our community for our youth by having the hall opened. But is providing, potential programs and services and classes and things for kids to help them who are struggling, is that not a service being provided for the kids, or is just incarceration, is that better? I guess I'm honestly confused. I'm looking for some clarity on where those statements are coming from.
I'd be happy to answer that. So, there's this thing that, juvenile hall is a punishment for a lot of our kids that are homeless, and we have an enormous amount of children out there that are homeless. Oftentimes, when you're homeless and you start acting out, right, sometimes it's a cry for help, and you want the structure of a home-like facility, and that's what juvenile halls are geared to be, as a home-like facility. And you connect, the JCOs, they connect with these kids on such a level that they haven't had that parenting throughout their whole life. And they now have some structure in their life. They have an ability to go to school on a regular basis. They have hot showers. So it's a disservice to that population of kids that don't have that luxury, that are living in the swamps. And now to have services, it would be great if we followed our mission statement that the juvenile hall has, is that we will provide robust services. We're not currently doing that. And that's a travesty for our community.
So by moving forward, I mean, if you were to provide those services, because the current system, I guess, is for those kids that are having an issue or homeless or want a place to have a hot shower, they have to go out and commit a crime to get these services, correct?
Not necessarily. Sometimes it depends on the system, right? You're even going to have your 300 kids, and those are your dependency kids, or your 600 kids. And you don't normally want to put your dependency kids in the hall, but sometimes for their own protection, because they have no other place to live, they end up needing to be there. So it's a very every individual case. So, I can't say that specifically, but you don't have to commit a crime in order to get to juvenile hall. Most of the time it is for a 602, which is the criminal justice side. But there are times when a 300 needs to be in the hall.
And so by, with that, again, I mean, those people that are getting those services is averaging 2 to 3 people a month. That's kind of what our incarceration rate is. And I guess this is a question. If we went the other direction, is that opening the door to provide services to 30, 40, 50, 100 kids a month that don't have to be locked up?
So your juvenile probation should be providing those services as it stands to the 40 kids that are currently on probation. Probation should be providing those services. Chief Raymond has provided us with reports that says in the last month they've started to provide those services. But before that, I believe a lot of the services and the programming that they had available, the ART, the MRT, the laundry list of things that he provided us, they hadn't been providing those for years. So ideally, yes, we want those services to be provided, but that's by the probation, juvenile probation department for the out-of-custody youth.
Okay, and the reason that we're not able to provide those now is, I guess, where is the location that those are provided? I'm curious. And we just don't have enough staffing to do both? Is that kind of what I'm gathering?
Thank you, Chief.
So there's services provided both by juvenile probation, as Supervisor Starkey has said, and juvenile hall staff. So a lot of the programs that were included in the list that was provided to you did occur in juvenile hall. And by no means were they all happening over the last year. One of the conversations we've had on a regular basis is, do we overload kids? Can we cycle programs? Things like that. The thing we would be missing is, as she stated, a place for kids to be locally, and not to say that if they're arrested and detained, they won't be arrested and detained, but they won't be detained here locally. Provided services by our staff in the hall locally, by our local partners, behavioral health, AOD, mental health, Remy Vista, things like that. That's not going to be a reality if the hall is closed, because those kids will be detained elsewhere. Programs that are provided outside of that by juvenile services, most of those have been referrals, not provided by staff. Most of the time my staff are running CFTs, child family teams, multidisciplinary team meetings with other partners and providers to staff cases, things like that. What's proposed here is that we have to bridge that gap, because I recognize there is definitely a gap when you take away a juvenile hall from a community. Those services aren't there any longer. That safe place isn't there any longer. The programs that hall staff would run with kids that are detained here, they're not there any longer. The other side of that is, it's not as easy to detain a kid when you don't have a local juvenile hall, in the sense that you have transportation, you have judges who are going to be less willing to detain youth, even for short periods of time, particularly short periods of time, when they have to be transported out of county because you're disconnecting them from the community. So a lot of the programs that I proposed in my recommendation are to bridge the gap that is created by the loss of a juvenile hall. We need to ramp up our programs, one way or the other, but particularly if juvenile hall is closed, we have to try and make more attempts to connect with kids, both the kids in the 602 world, which is probation, as well as kids that aren't, that are at risk. We don't house youth that are 300 kids in juvenile hall, and we haven't. I think possibly one of the last times was a kid that I authorized a booking on long before I was chief, and I had a very interesting conversation with my assistant chief at the time, who clarified the situation for me and why we do not book 300 kids. We're not staffed to meet the regulatory requirements to house both 600 youth and 300 youth together, things like that. But programming-wise, that's the big thing. There's a gap. We have to try and bridge that gap for a multitude of reasons, for the benefit of our kids, for the reality of the situation where the court isn't going to detain as many youth as they might if we had our own local detention facility. We have to try and meet, halfway is a bad way to put it, but we have to try and meet those needs in a different fashion, because we've removed part of how we deal with that now. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Thank you, Chief. Any other discussion amongst the board? Any motions for any action in this regard then?
Make a motion that we move forward on the closure of the juvenile hall.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Maybe Neil or Joel could help me with this one last question. The wording we use here about closure of the hall. If the pendulum were to swing and we needed to reopen the hall after an official closure, would we have to jump through what kind of steps? Would we have to go through environmental reviews again? Would we have to update building standards? I was wondering if it would be better for us to officially say suspend rather than close.
I mean, that's kind of a BSCC question that I don't know the answer to, but if you want us to look more into it, we can.
Did you have something for, in
If I
response to
may,
that, Chief?
I would just ask for direction to staff to begin the process, because specific language would be needed to ensure that's the case, that BSCC doesn't take the haul off the books, but that we can maintain certifications, things like that. There's, as Ms. Williams brought up, there's staffing issues that have to be navigated with HR and county admin. There are numerous pieces that need to be put in place. My recommendation would be direction to staff to begin the process towards closing juvenile hall, something along those lines.
Thank you. Supervisor Wilson, would you be willing to?
Excuse me? If he gets to get, my past experience dealing with the state, you close it, you're right back to square one. I would strongly recommend you either get suspended or do something. Thank you for the
Thank you, Paul.
interruption.
Yes, I'm modifying my motion that we move to direct staff to implement the closure.
We have a motion.
I'll resecond the new wording.
Thank you. Kylie, would you pull the vote?
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Supervisor Starkey?
No.
Supervisor Wilson?
Yes.
Supervisor Borges?
Yes.
Chair Short?
No. Okay, I believe we are moving on to our last item. That's item 22, which is receive and review the fiscal year 2022-23 budget update and general fund budget summary as presented by the county administrative officer and the auditor controller. Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You get me today because the auditor controller is on vacation. So, yeah. So this is an
Who
annual
allowed that?
process we go through, and it provides the departments an opportunity to give us projections for their year-end budgets. And they go through that process by comparing that to actual expenditures and revenues to date, and they look at that compared to the adopted budget approved by the board in September. And it's an opportunity for them to report any variances to the budget team that we need to look at or that we should be aware of in order to address expenditures that seem to be on track to exceed the budget or revenues that are projected to come in under the budget. Fortunately, for the second year in a row, we didn't have any significant variances reported by our departments, so it didn't actually necessitate any budget meetings with the budget team to address those variances. Consistent again also with last year is the most significant variances are in our staffing, our salary and benefits. We're still struggling to staff our positions. Our vacancy rates are extremely high. The majority of the projected shortfall this year, or the actual amount coming in under budget for expenditures, is through our bigger general fund departments, juvenile hall, the jail, and probation. They have an estimated savings in salaries and benefits of $1,292,403, so it's pretty significant. Other things that we noted through our review of the budgets that were submitted is there are a couple of program-related revenues that are down. One of them is in the recreation department, and that is due mainly to, we lost quite a few sponsorships actually through our youth basketball program from COVID, during COVID to post-COVID and pre-COVID. Actually, it was pretty significant. We also had a couple of volleyball leagues that were scheduled that didn't garner enough interest or enough team signups to conduct the leagues. And in addition to that, the other variances noted were some of the grant-related stuff through California Department of Public Health. Those have an indirect impact to the general fund just due to the administration under OES and administration here in this building. Those are your FEP, HVP, and PAN flu grants. We've struggled for staffing again. Once again, our OES manager position has been vacant since September of 2022. The same situation happened last year. The board did create the coordinator position that has been filled, and that person has been doing everything they possibly can to keep that department afloat. There was also a position created on the public health side of things for a FEP and HPP director or coordinator that would help administer these grants, because that's always been a struggle under OES, managing these California Department of Public Health grants that should be under the umbrella of public health. So we created that coordinator position through last year's budget, recruited for it, thought we had somebody hired, went all the way down to the board actually approving the step C for that person because of their qualifications, and we have not heard from that person since. So once again, same situation. We are being ghosted by applicants. They're either not showing up for interviews, they're being offered positions, and we never hear from them again. That recently happened with our OES manager as well. We had an interview that was supposed to be set up, and they stopped returning phone calls and emails. So it seems to be kind of a consistent pattern we're seeing here. Some of the things that have been done through this year's budget, as the board knows, you had approved some general fund funds for replacing some of our cars for the second or third year in a row, actually, to have some of the funds available to replace some of our vehicles, which is kind of a key thing because we do many times in the past since I've been here are operating general fund automobiles that are not exactly to par. And so having the funds available to replace some of these is pretty critical. And so we have replaced a vehicle for Agriculture Department, Assessor's Office, Treasurer Tax Collector's Office, and one in CDD as well. Also, as you know, we did the transition for Animal Services and Ag. That transition is complete, other than the fact that Ag still has a couple of phases left in order to get what they need over there in their new location. A lot of that comes down to storage space and workshop space that they currently don't have. We're going to try to look as much as we can at the Animal Services campus to see if there's anything available for them as opposed to building a new structure at the new location of the Ag Department. Regardless, there is going to have to be some sort of structure put at Ag for their storage of their supplies and their weights and measures equipment, things like that. So we're working with the department head as well as CDD to try to develop a plan, building maintenance as well, to try to develop a plan of what we can do out there to provide them a necessary space without creating a building that's going to cost us $400,000 or $500,000. So the initial projection of something that was submitted was in that range. And I don't think we're prepared for that yet, and I think we can do better. So that's our focus now. The capital projects that were completed were finally the energy efficiency project was completed through Aircon. Our boiler project is finally done after a lot of issues with that. We have a new roof for the rec gymnasium coming up soon, hopefully when the weather clears up. That'll be done. And we still have the new accounting system that the board has approved the last couple of years. It's been a struggle with the RFP and trying to put that together so it makes sense and it encompasses all of the functions that we need. So that, based on the update from information technology, should be out sometime in the next few weeks or month. So that's a good thing. So hopefully by the end of this fiscal year, we will have proposals in and we'll be able to know what we're looking at as far as the cost is concerned. And I don't know if the board has any other questions. Measure R is also on track. The revenues are coming in strong again. As you also know, we only budgeted revenues through November because we didn't know what was going to happen with Measure U. So we were able to retain Measure R. So the plan would be that the auditor controller will bring back a budget revision to include the rest of that revenue for this fiscal year, as well as expenditures. And currently what we need, there's not a need for any expenditures as far as wages and staffing is concerned, because once again, those are short and our budgeted amounts are under budget. So the likelihood of those additional funds will be put into the capital infrastructure and capital improvements amount for Measure R. We are hoping to come back and meet with building maintenance here in the next couple of weeks about his capital improvement plan and bring some projects to the board that we can get working on before the end of this fiscal year for Measure R funds. And we have several of them identified right now, and we'll bring back a priority list to the board.
Very good. Thank you, Neil. Is there any questions or comments for Neil from the board? Okay, is there any public comment on this budget update? Seeing no public comment, we'll go ahead and close. That's not an action item. Appreciate the update, Neil. And I think, Kylie, that was the last item, yes?
Correct.
Hey, I didn't miss any. Well, at this time, I will adjourn this meeting until our next regularly scheduled meeting, March 28th, 2023. Thank you. Have a good day.